Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect.
Liar, liar, pants on fire,
that
Fauci.
The NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain of function research in the Wuhan Institute.
And that was Dr. Anthony Fauci testifying under oath in 2021 that the National Institutes of Health did not fund gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute, despite the NIH providing a grant to EcoHealth Alliance to research coronaviruses at the Wuhan lab. Now, new files released by former DNI Tulsi Gabbard show officials shielding Fauci from a whistleblower complaint filed under the Biden administration alleging Fauci lied to Congress about the gain-of-function research. Instead, Fauci is said to have met with the intelligence community, including the CIA, several times, to shape a public narrative that the coronavirus originated in a wet market in Wuhan instead of a lab leak, something that we questioned throughout 2020, the year the pandemic hit. Joe Biden would later issue a preemptive pardon for Fauci just hours before leaving office last year, before President Trump took his oath. Joining me now with more is the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, Senator Rand Paul, who has issued a subpoena for Fauci to appear before Congress. And Senator, thank you very much for joining me this morning. I want to start off with you telling us what you've learned. Frame the story here. What have you learned about Anthony Fauci's role in COVID-19?
Well, the investigation of COVID origins has been going on for several years. The Biden administration stymied us and wouldn't give us any of the documents. The Trump administration has been very cooperative, particularly Secretary Kennedy. They have turned over virtually everything. And what we now know beyond a reasonable doubt is that Anthony Fauci did indeed fund gain-of-function research. We have the evidence that the experiments were gaining in function. The viruses were becoming more lethal, more attachable to human cells, and more infectious. We do know that this was going on, that was funded by the NIH, specifically under the tutelage of Anthony Fauci. We know all of that, but we know even more now. We know that the initial estimate by the scientists at the CIA was that this came from the lab. They agreed with our supposition. But Anthony Fauci was able to coerce, cajole, persuade, and dangle money to get people in the intelligence community to change their vote. So a scientific commission within the CIA voted 6-1 to say it came from the lab. He somehow was able to get that change. We have evidence of that happening. The virologists that he handpicked that were big recipients of federal dollars, all of them initially were saying it looks like it was manipulated. The virus looks manipulated. He was able to convince them otherwise. We now have evidence that in January of 2020, that he was already acknowledging that the virus did not come from the wet market, that the wet market was a spreader event, but wasn't an initial event because we had lineages of people way before the wet market that were getting sick. Everyone acknowledged that, but for years he's been telling us it came from animals at the wet market. This was all misdirection. This was a conspiracy. This was a cover-up. And he has not really gotten his just desserts on this. And we want to make sure that the American public and that history records that he was involved with funding this dangerous research that led to a pandemic that killed 15 million people. There need to be repercussions.
Unbelievable. Now, when you say he dangled money in front of the intelligence community, what do you say? They were paid for what? What do you mean dangled money?
I think that's maybe inappropriate saying the intelligence committee. He did for the scientists. That one of the scientists got an $8 million grant 2 months after they switched their private position from believing it came from the lab to the public. With the CIA, it was more the idea that a lot of things are funded within the CIA in general. Grants, they go to the secret Defense Department grants as well as CIA involvement in gain-of-function research. And I think he was so intimately involved with that ever since 9/11, really. He became involved with the biolabs, bioarms, everything around the world he had his hands in, and he had the power to come in and talk to their superiors and reverse the decision from the scientists. So I'm not saying specifically money was given to anybody, but I think in general he was able to use the manipulation and the threat of withholding funds to get his way, even with the intelligence agencies.
I understand. Now, think about that. President Trump is in office for the first time, for the first term. He's told there's a pandemic coming. The entire country is going to get sick. He's asking his administration, what do we know about this? The whole time, Anthony Fauci knew that he actually directed money to fund this research, and he never said anything about it. The only guy who knew anything about coronavirus.
Another key aspect to this was in 2018, a group of scientists at the University of North Carolina and in China applied for a grant to one of our secret agencies, DARPA. And in that grant, they wanted to create a coronavirus that looks suspiciously like what COVID-19 looks like. This should have set off alarm bells. When COVID-19 showed up, all of those scientists should have rushed to Washington. They should have rushed to the president and said, oh my goodness, they did it. They created this virus. They wanted to work with us to get money to do it, and now it looks like they actually did it. Not one scientist came forward. Every one of those scientists zipped their lips and did not inform the American public that the virus looked just like a virus that the Chinese were wanting to create 2 years before with our money.
Outrageous. What about this pardon? What can be done now? Joe Biden gave him a preemptive pardon literally hours before President Trump took office. Do you believe that can be challenged? Is it legitimate? Was it done by an auto pen?
You know, lawyers and people from the Attorney General's office will have to determine. I think it's extraordinary. It's a pardon that goes over 10 years and doesn't have specific crimes. The only other pardon like this in the history of the United States would be what Hunter Biden received. And there's been a lot of questions about that. So a 10-year pardon on non-specific crimes, I wonder whether or not that is the intention the Constitution had when they gave the pardon power. But it has to be challenged. Me saying it's not enough. You would have to actually go to court and challenge the validity of it. There also is some question, did President Biden, was he aware of who Anthony Fauci was? Did he specifically understand the details of the case and grant Anthony Fauci a pardon? Or did a low-level assistant with an auto pen do this without consultation with the president? I don't know all the facts on that, but I think it's worth coming out. He should be asked about the pardon. If he comes, if he obeys the law and the subpoena, if he comes to my committee, we will ask him about the pardon.
All right, Senator, thanks very much for your work on this. We'll be watching your work. America needs to know. Senator Rand Paul, thank you, sir. And that'll do it for us for the Sunday.